Okay.
All right, worthy Vice President, officers, and members, in formally opening this webinar, I respectfully request for the efficient management of business that you give undivided attention to such matters as may be brought before us, and that you will bear in mind that we are assembled not for the promotion of individual interests, but for the general welfare of the Webinar Wednesday movement. As president, I shall endeavor to decide without partiality upon every question submitted for consideration, and I confidently rely upon the members supporting the dignity of the chair. We will begin with our opening ode. Shall song and music be forgot when working men combine? With love united, may they not have power almost divine? Shall idle drones still live like kings, on labor not their own? Shall true men starve, while thieves and rings reap where they have not sown? Now, it is my pleasure to, by the power vested in me as president, I hereby declare Webinar Wednesdays duly and legally opened for the transaction of all business that may be legally brought before it. Madam Buenamasi, you have the floor.
Thank you. All right. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Webinar Wednesday. As we were discussing at the beginning, this is actually the anniversary week of Webinar Wednesday. We kicked off a year ago. Tonight, our topic, as you have likely gathered, is history of the IBEW. I will endeavor to introduce you to a very long and proud history. So, let's take a look, and I will apologize in advance. I am using Wi-Fi in a rural area of Ontario. So if I click the button and it takes a minute for a slide to pop up, that's a Wi-Fi issue. My apologies. So the birth of an industry. So the electrical union, of course, began with the birth of the electricity, right? So the telegraph was the first electrical accomplishment. In 1844, the first telegraph wires were strung between Washington, D.C. and Baltimore, Maryland. The first telegraph message was transmitted in Canada in 1846. And before I move any further, Cheryl, are you able to launch the poll?
The poll is launched. It should,
perfect.
People should be seeing it.
So between which two cities was the first Canadian telegraph transmitted? Was it Halifax to Fredericton, Toronto to Hamilton, Winnipeg to Edmonton, Quebec City to Montreal?
So we still have some votes coming in.
Cool. That's great.
Majority, I think, have voted, so I will end that and share the results.
I'm not seeing the poll, so can you share?
So, sorry, is everyone seeing? I can just maybe get some thumbs up if people can see the results. Yep, okay, perfect. So we had 42% with Halifax and Fredericton, 35% with Toronto and Hamilton. Nobody thought it was Winnipeg or Edmonton, and 33% with Quebec City and Montreal. And
all right,
the answer is
the first telegraph message transmitted in Canada was sent from Toronto to Hamilton on December 19th, 1846 by the Toronto, Hamilton, Niagara, and St. Catharines Electromagnetic Telegraph Company. So with the birth of an industry brings the birth of a union. So in 1890, wiremen and linemen were seeing 12-hour days, 7 days per week. They were working in all types of weather. The skilled laborers in other trades were earning much higher wages than they were. Linemen suffered an exceptionally high mortality rate and could not expect to earn any more than 15 to 20 cents per hour for a 12-hour day. So the national mortality rate for electrical workers was twice the national average for all other industries. That led to the establishment of a mixed union of linemen and wiremen, the AFL Federal Labor Union 5221. And they elected President Henry Miller, who quickly realized that this was simply a starting point and knew only a national organization of electrical workers with jurisdiction covering the entire industry could win better treatment from the larger corporate telephone, telegraph, electric power, electrical contracting, and electrical equipment manufacturing companies. So you can see there on the slide, there is a table of the hourly wages in 1895. And so the electricians at the time were concerned that there wasn't any training and safety standards as well. And so that led to Grand President Henry Miller beginning the start of the National Brotherhood of Electrical Workers. So Henry Miller was a man of remarkable courage and energy. J.T. Kelly, the first secretary of our brotherhood, said of Miller, "No man could have done more for our union in its first years than he did." Miller packed his tools and an extra shirt in an old carpet bag and rode the rails to many U.S. cities to work the trade. The receiving committee for Miller's arrival in a city was often a railroad bull, a policeman who chased him and tried to put him in jail for his unauthorized mode of travel. Nonetheless, Miller persevered. Everywhere he went, he organized the electrical workers he met into local unions. Largely because of Miller's work, a great deal was accomplished in that first year of the union. Local unions chartered by the AFL and other electrical unions were organized all over the United States, including Chicago, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, Evansville, and Indianapolis, Indiana, Louisville, Kentucky, New Orleans, Louisiana, Cincinnati, and Toledo, Ohio, Philadelphia and Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, Duluth, Minnesota, and New York City. So Henry Miller at the time was not referred to as an international president as we presently know today, but his title was Grand President. And I don't know about you, but I'm pretty sure Atticus Ainsworth would agree that we should go back to that title today. The first convention for the NBEW, as it was known then, was November 21st, 1891. 10 delegates representing about 300 workers in 8 cities met in St. Louis to organize the NBEW. Within a week, they had composed a constitution and preamble. They had devised an initiation ritual, which we will talk about in a few moments. They had made plans for a death benefit, voted to affiliate with the AFL, and established a per capita tax of 10 cents per month to finance the organization. They also called for local unions to put aside 5 cents of each member's monthly dues for strike benefits, which were set at a rate of $5 per week for married men and $4 per week for single men. At the first convention in St. Louis in 1891, the 10 delegates did not want the press to know how few people were present. They had changes of clothes in their meeting room and would get changed, sneak out the back door, and re-enter through the front door so the media would think there were more people present than were actually there. So news reports boasted of nearly 100 men in attendance at the first NBEW convention, when in actual fact it was 10 only. So another piece of exciting history from this time period, the first issue of The Worker was published in 1893 and was driven entirely by the efforts of our first Secretary Treasurer, James T. Kelly. Its first year, it quickly came under threat with a financial panic in the fall of that same year. Unemployment rates skyrocketed and the IBEW lost over half of its membership, and with it, a primary source of its funding. With the IBEW close to collapse, Kelly chose to mortgage his household effects and sell his building association stock to keep the organization afloat. Thankfully, it was enough for the IBEW to weather the storm. The worker stayed in publication, and by the 1895 convention, the IBEW balance sheets were in the black. It was Kelly's belief that the electrical worker was what kept the IBEW going through those troubled times. He stated at the 1921 convention, we could not have managed to keep our brotherhood intact through these early years if it were not for our magazine. That's a cherished magazine. So hopefully you still check yours either online or receive it in the mail. At the 6th convention in Pittsburgh in October 1899, the union name was officially changed to the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, as we know it today. H.S. Hurd of Hamilton, Ontario, was selected to be vice president with jurisdiction over the newly chartered Canadian locals. Between December 1899 and May 1900, Canadian IBEW locals were chartered in Ottawa, Hamilton, Montreal, Toronto, and London. In 1903, by action of the 7th Convention in St. Louis, Missouri, which took place in 1901, that's when the convention took place, the 7 districts were created and it came into effect in 1903. The first district included Canada, east of the Rocky Mountains, and New York. And then in 1947, all Canadian district was established by International President Daniel Tracy. So in 1903, because we're not already confused, at least I know I am confused, and every time I talk about it, I'm confused. There were also 3 other grand vice presidents, in addition to the 7 grand vice presidents I just mentioned, who later became known as the international vice presidents. They had no districts at that time. So this is a very confusing history about where the IEC and the IVPs and everybody comes into play. But eventually it all sort of figures itself out. And then in 1947, once in office, International President Daniel Tracy saw to it that convention promises were promptly kept. Vice presidents and IEC members got together in January to discuss redistricting the Brotherhood, and they submitted a plan for 12 vice presidential districts, 2 more than what currently existed at the time, and 1 all-Canadian district. They also rearranged the 8 executive council districts, but retained the same number of representatives. The Tracy administration also instituted regular progress meetings in 1947 for all vice presidential districts. He arranged for staff members to report directly to vice presidents, who now established their own regional offices. I'm going to go into more detail about the Tracy administration and who Daniel Tracy was in a few slides. So hold tight for more on him. Here we can see the list of first district international vice presidents. You will note that it wasn't until the 5th vice president that they were Canadian specific residents of Canada who were responsible for Canada. Now, I believe we have a poll. if we can launch that. And the question is, what is the first name of our first Canadian IVP? So here on the chart, I have E. Ingalls. What does the E stand for? Does it stand for Edward, Emmett, Ezra, Ernest? Anyone know?
Votes coming in. More votes coming in. We are across the board here. They all seem plausible, so I think it's hard to pick out.
Absolutely.
All right, I think most have voted. I will go ahead and end and share. And 36% said Ezra, 27% said Ernest, and both Edward and Emmett received 18% each. Fun fact, it is not Ezra, but where does Ezra come from, Kate?
Well, you and I chose Ezra in our poll because that's my son's name. Yes, the actual E for E. Ingalls is Ernest. So Ernest Ingalls was our first Canadian international vice president. Now let's take a look. We all might see a familiar name on this list here joining us this evening. So here you can see that there have been 14 International Executive Council members. We're in our 14th one, which doesn't match up with our international vice presidents. And that's of course because it was the Executive Council that came before the district system. So exciting to see those names there. And again, as you can see, the first couple of International Executive Council members were not Canadian. And so it wasn't until J.L. McBride out of Winnipeg, Canada, that we saw a Canadian as our representative there. All right, so here we can see this is a timeline of when various branches joined the ranks of the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers. As of today, we presently have 6 specific industry branch departments within the international office. Those 6 branches presently are utility, construction and maintenance, broadcasting and telecommunications, railroad, manufacturing, and government employees. These departments conduct annual conferences. So the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers has often represented more than strictly inside, outside, linemen, wiremen, right? So the railroad joined us in 1919 and so on from there, right? The rest is history. And now a unique piece of IBEW history. Before I reveal it, in the chat, can you tell me, what do you think might be the strangest initiation ritual that once took place, like for real, in real life in the IBEW? What strange initiation ritual once took place in the IBEW? Fishing out of a bucket of water. I'm enjoying some of these thoughts. Lick a 9-volt battery. Give members shocks. Any other thoughts? Turn an Edison bulb on through your hand. Or Edison, sorry. The electric eel test. Ooh, what might that involve? All right, let's see, let's find out. So pictured here is an image of an old ritual book. And so this is page 6. And what I would like to draw your attention to, I have circled now in yellow. And so everyone can see it. At this moment, the candidates are to receive an electric shock. The inspectors will take the hand of the candidate nearest to him and in this way form a fraternal circuit. Indeed, those who guessed that members were shocked, indeed, we really did shock people to initiate them into, I'm going to say at least the NBEW, possibly even the International Brotherhood. All right. So, unique fact. I also would like to note that further in this old ritual booklet, there are secret handshakes. So a secret handshake and a secret sign to enter the meeting, one to close out the meeting, one specific signal to vote. There are alphabets and numbers in ciphers and a specific meeting floor map with an altar in the center. So Atticus Ainsworth says that it's like we were a completely exclusive and secret society at one time, which is actually super cool. I think anyway. The history geek in me thinks so. All right. So IBEW performing 95% of all electrical construction work. So when the United States entered World War II, they initiated a manufacturing plan to keep the military and the country supplied during the war. At that time, the US Secretary of Labor was Frances Perkins, the first woman to be in a cabinet position. She appointed the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, then International President Daniel Tracy, who we talked about earlier. He became the number 2 person in the Department of Labor and served in that capacity until 1945, when the war ended and Perkins resigned from the cabinet. Tracy came back to the IBEW as the international president, but not without an internal battle for that position, which I'll explain a little bit more in a moment. Pictured also there is Joseph D. Keenan, who served as the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers International Secretary from 1945 to 1976. He had joined Local 134, Chicago, in 1914. In 1940, he joined President Roosevelt's National Defense Advisory Commission to mobilize labor forces for the war effort. From 1943 to 1945, he served as vice chairman for labor of the War Production Board, where he worked to stabilize industrial relations in the construction field and to halt strikes and work stoppages while arbitration agreements were conducted. From 1945 to 1948, he served in post-war Germany as an advisor to American Commander General Lucius D. Clay and as President Truman's special coordinator between labor and industry for reorganizing trade unions. Working alongside him was Daniel W. Tracy, who served as IBEW International President from 1933 to 1940. When war broke out, as I mentioned, he was appointed by President Roosevelt as Assistant Secretary of Labor in charge of military and war-related construction, a position he kept until 1946, when he was again elected as IBEW President. Thanks to the efforts of Keenan and Tracy, the IBEW performed 95% of all electrical construction work on federal and military projects. So I highlight this relationship and this fascinating piece of IBEW history to emphasize the impact that we as the IBEW can have when building strong relationships with politicians, and how building those strong relationships can have a positive impact on our industry and the work we are able to secure for our members. When we know what we've done well in the past, we can replicate it and do it well again in the future, right?
Perfect. Thanks, Kate. So there's a number of labor bodies that have existed throughout time in Canada. And I mean, we could spend a whole webinar talking just about them, but there's a few that I want to highlight and how they relate to the IBEW. So in 1886, an organization called the Trades and Labor Congress of Canada, or the TLC, was formed. And they were formed as a labor organization strictly for craft unions. So if we kind of think back to the Knights of Labor and craft unionism, which is where the labor movement really started, craft union workers were pretty much construction workers, so skilled workers was what they fell into. And so in 1908, the IBEW affiliated with the TLC as we had craft workers. There was another organization that was formed in 1902. It later became the Canadian Federation of Labor in 1908. And it was formed by workers that were booted out of the TLC. And there were a variety of reasons for that. And the only reason I mention this organization is the name comes into play a little bit later. The CFL, as it was known at that time, really only lasted until about the late 1920s, at which point it spawned into another labor organization. And to match the craft unionism of the TLC with the rise of industrial unionism, which, if you don't know, is more considered unskilled workers at the time, so those were your factory workers, the Canadian Congress of Labor, or the CCL, was formed in 1940. And if we have any of our American IBEW family joining us tonight, you could think of the TLC as being akin to the AFL, or the American Federation of Labor, and the CCL being akin to the CIO, or Congress of Industrial Organizations. So both of our countries saw fights against craft and industrial unionism. Now we know that as labor organizations, we are stronger together. So in 1956, the TLC and the CCL came together and merged, and the Canadian Labor Congress was born. And by virtue of the IBEW's affiliation with the TLC, we became affiliates of the CLC. So very similar to in the States when the AFL and the CIO merged. And despite the fact that they wanted to come together and create a stronger union, there were still many differing ideals between craft and trade unionism, or sorry, craft and industrial unionism. And there were also differing opinions between international unions, which the majority of the construction trades belong to, and solely Canadian unions. And so there was kind of a lot of back and forth disputes. There were many threats of construction trades leaving the CLC. And then in 1982, they actually did it. There were 12 building trades that were upset with the CLC. They had stopped paying their per capita and they had been suspended. And 10 of those building trades officially left and formed the Canadian Federation of Labor. Basically, re-kickstarted it, rekindled it under the CFL hadn't been active for a very long time, as they had dissolved into another union in the late 1920s, but they chose the name the CFL as what they were going to affiliate under. And there was a lot of support for this. Of the 105 IBEW local unions in Canada, only one opposed the decision. So there was a lot of unhappiness with the CLC. There was also a lot of other disputes going on at the time, but this was one of the big ones. And it was interesting because the International Vice President of Canada at the time, Ken Rose, was actually elected Vice President of the Canadian Labor Congress at their 1976 convention. So the IBEW held a prominent role in the CLC. However, 2 weeks before the 1980 CLC convention, he resigned. And then 2 years later, pulled all of the IBEW out of the CLC and into the CFL. And even put it to the point that if IBEW local unions tried to reaffiliate with the CLC, that they would be placed under trusteeship. So there was really strong opinions about moving to the CFL. But you know, as we know, we are stronger together, and over time, the relationship did repair itself. A large part of that had to do with the fact that the construction unions were being rated by CLC affiliates. And if you don't know, when you affiliate with the CLC, you sign on to a no rating clause, which means you agree not to poach union members from other CLC affiliates. Now everybody else outside of the CLC is free game. And so these 10 construction local unions in the CFL were up for grabs. So 1977 comes around, we come to our senses, we come back to the Canadian Labour Congress. And so that's kind of the short version of the story. There's a lot of interesting history there if you do want to dig into it, but that's kind of our journey in Canada through union affiliation. And I'll pass it back to you, Kate.
Thank you. All right. Next, we will take a look at the history of women in the IBEW. So in 1892, at the National Brotherhood of Electrical Workers Convention, the first women became members of the union. Although a few female members were initiated in 1892, their presence caused such an uproar that the Brotherhood restricted membership to male workers in 1893. So they didn't last for very long. However, the growth of the electrical manufacturing industry and the increasing employment of female factory operatives, however, forced them to reconsider. Electricity has opened many new avenues of employment for women who have to earn their own living. Harper's Weekly, a widely circulated magazine, pointed out in 1894. In the factories, they said, we have seen girls busily employed in winding fine wire on the spools of small electromagnetics for telegraph and telephone instruments, and in many of the lighter and finer task incidents to electrical manufacturing. Although a number of members seem to believe that women workers were a passing industrial fad, ladies on the call, passing fad, their obvious presence in the trade could not be denied. Voting in 1895 to readmit women, the Brotherhood made attempts to organize quote unquote girls employed at the General Electric Works in Shanakatee, New York, and Lynn, Massachusetts, and at Westinghouse Electric Company in Pittsburgh.
Schenectady.
Thank you.
No problem.
Thank you. 4 years after women were first initiated into the NBEW, when only one organizer was on the NBEW payroll, a second, Mrs. Mary Honzik of St. Louis, was hired. This development gave our Brotherhood the distinction of being the first union to have a female organizer on its staff. So female organizer dates back to 1896. The demographics of the union began to change as women joined the IBEW in larger numbers. And in 1897, Local Union 80, the first all-women's local union, was chartered in Cleveland, Ohio. So 23 years before women could vote in the United States, the first telephone operators Local 80 of Cleveland was formed. May Patterson was elected president, and according to the press secretary of Cleveland's Local 38, Thomas Wheeler, said, in Cleveland, the Electric Girls have an organization with a membership of about 40, with one of the finest halls in the city. And that's quoted from the Electrical Worker of July 1897. Julia O'Connor, moving right along. So in sorry, 1919, I get my 18s and my 19s confused. In 1919, she was elected president of Telephone Operators Local 1A in Boston, Massachusetts. She then led a successful 5-day strike against New England Telephone, securing their rights to collective bargaining. In an acknowledgement of her efforts, the IBEW created a telephone operators department at the international office and installed O'Connor as its director, the first woman to hold this title. Canadian women in the IBEW, they played an integral role in the Winnipeg General Strike, where over 500 telephone operators, better known as, or commonly referred to as hello girls, walked off the job at the end of their shift, and their shift replacements didn't show up, virtually shutting down all telecommunication in the city. These women later became members of IBEW Local 435. Now, let's chat pensions. So in 1922, the IBEW created the Electrical Workers Benefit Association, the EWBA, to ensure sufficient resources to provide a dignified interment when an IBEW member passed away. The delegates to the 1927 IBEW convention authorized the creation of a pension fund, and in 1928, the officers of the IBEW introduced the IBEW Pension Benefit Fund to provide much needed and previously unattainable pension benefits for all participating members. So the Pension Benefit Fund started in 1927, before pension plans were even mainstream in the US or Canada. So that's an exciting piece of history, something we can be proud of. And speaking of benefits of being a member, let's take a quick look at membership types and benefits. So in 1919, we established the International Strike Fund. It was financed by 14 cents per month from each member. And the International Convention of 1921, as I mentioned, voted to form the Electrical Workers Benefit Association, the EWBA, providing life insurance to IBEW members. In 1927, we traded the strike fund to introduce the pension benefit plan. In 1935, the second type of membership was created by referendum vote. So the B membership, just as it seemed that unionism was becoming more accepted in the United States, a controversy emerged. Growing numbers of less skilled, lower wage workers wanted to organize themselves and reap the benefits of collective bargaining. The IBEW needed to find a way to incorporate groups of workers with different levels of skill, earnings, and experience within the union without risking the pension and insurance plans of its members. To address this issue, in March of 1935, the IEC submitted constitutional amendments that would allow workers to join the union as B members, a class typically used for female workers who could not afford the regular dues and did not participate in pension and insurance benefits. Before 1935, there was only one type of IBEW membership, later known as A membership. In 1935, a B membership was created by referendum vote. Now, unorganized workers in utilities and manufacturing plants could join at a lower admission fee of $1.50 and pay a lower per capita of 50 cents. These members did not participate in death and pension benefits since they did not pay for them, and in return they were not allowed equal voting rights with the other members at conventions and on referendums. In 1946, National Employees Benefit Fund, the NEBF agreement, was signed by the IBEW and NICA, and the fund went into effect in 1947. Also, at that convention, the BA membership was created. In 1953, the B membership was eliminated. All members were required to transfer to A or BA membership. Additional to the slide notes, in 1977, the IBEW and NICA agreed to improve the NEBF benefits and increase employer contributions from 1% to 3%. Other notable moments: in 1985, the Pension Investment and Employee Benefits Department was established. In 2006, the IBEW established the Family Medical Care Plan. And in 2008, the IBEW introduced a national 401k plan. So here you can see a chart that shows us our per capita amounts and the different types of memberships that were there. I can see some people are very close. They've all leaned into their computers to see the slides, so that's great. All right. And so some modern history, some more modern history. And by that, I mean, I will start with 1986. So in 1986, International President J.J. Barry developed construction organizing membership development training, which is known as our COMET course. And that focus on membership development was that from that moment forward. In 2001, I don't know how many Canadian members are familiar. We lost 21 brothers in the 9/11 attacks. So 17 of those members were from Local 3 in New York City, and 4 of them were from Local 1212. And Anthony Zagara from Local 3 died in November, on November 28th of 2001 from injuries sustained from the attack. So as Canadians, we maybe don't always recognize 9/11. However, as International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, brothers and sisters, we do want to remember those lives that were lost during that attack. And another notable piece of history, more recent history, in 2007, we introduced the Code of Excellence program. It was launched in the construction branch. And in 2010, Code of Excellence was expanded to all remaining branches. Today, our Code of Excellence program is providing a foundation for AFL-CIO affiliated police unions and who are in the process of developing their own program. And so the Code of Excellence is being recognized certainly throughout all the whole labor movement, across the US. And so those are some of our more notable modern moments in history. And those are the facts that we pulled out from our expansive history to share with you and introduce to you tonight.